evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 London and District Academy of Medicine Virtual Healthcare Forum. My name is Dr. Sharad Rai. I'm the president of the London and District Academy of Medicine. I'm also the District 2 chair of the Ontario Medical Association and also the member at large for the section on general and family practice. Joining me today, I have the privilege of being joined by Dr. Alex Summers from the Middlesex London Health Unit, as well as the one, the only Mr. Alex Kopacz, 2018 gold winning Olympian. So I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing our panelists. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the London District Academy of Medicine is. We're a professional medical association that serves member physicians in London, and we serve our community. And that's the purpose of the society, which is to foster professional and social harmony. And we do a lot of community outreach. I would encourage all of you, when you have the opportunity to do so, to go to ldam.ca. It's ldam.ca. And please have a look at all the great work the Academy has been doing on your behalf. If you are a physician in London and you are not a member of the London and District Academy of Medicine, for whatever strange reason that may be, please email us. Our email address is ldam@rogers.com. That email address again is ldam@rogers.com. We're taking phone calls this evening. Any questions that you have for Mr. Alex Kopacz or Dr. Alex Summers from the Health Unit, please give us a call at 519-673-0950. That phone number again, 519-673-0950. We would love to hear your questions and share them with our expert panelists. Now, without further ado, let's go to Mr. Alex Kopacz, 2018 Pyeongchang gold medalist. He was the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympic gold medalist for Team Canada. He's a resident of London. He's a champion both on and off the bobsled track. Alex Kopacz has recently competed against COVID-19 as well and is emerging victorious. Alex has a long track record of high levels of success in the bobsled world, achieving top 10 results for many years on the national and international bobsled scene. Now Alex has demonstrated his championship spirit, experiencing COVID-19 firsthand and thankfully now recovering. And Alex, I'm sure I speak for a lot of Londoners when I can say I was as concerned as anyone else in the community about your well-being when we heard the news through various news outlets actually in April that you contracted COVID and you'd been briefly hospitalized. Hope you're doing well. Great to have you here this evening. Thanks for joining us. And I wonder if you can share a bit about yourself with us. Tell us, your experience with COVID-19. A lot of us in London have no idea what it's like. A lot of people are still struggling with do we get vaccinated against COVID? Do we not? I get that we're not quite there yet. The headlines are people are trying to get vaccinated against COVID, but there's still a lot of people out there like on the fence. Do we get vaccinated? Do we not? It would be wonderful to hear a bit more about you. Share a bit of your story with us.
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys so much for inviting me. I certainly hope that I can contribute in a positive way. Might change some people's minds out there. Getting COVID, contrary to like a competitive belief, I definitely didn't do it to see how hard I could take it or if I could handle all the worst symptoms. But definitely with everything that I've gone through and the physical prowess and the health and how seriously I take all that, my experience with COVID was, of course, shocking because it just got worse and worse and worse with each passing day. And kind of when I caught it, I was on a business trip with my business partner, and he'd also had caught it. So highly likely would have been the airport in Toronto and or Calgary. But by the time we got home, I started to deteriorate quite quickly, and it just started with extremely high fever. I think I averaged between 39 degrees. I'd say like just actually probably more spot on 39 degrees over 6 days relentlessly. Some days 40, maybe 38. And then I had just the coughing that just kept going and going and going. And it got worse with each day. Whereas my business partner just lost his sense of smell and taste. Maybe a bit of a headache, but it didn't last more than a day or two. He got his taste within a couple weeks. Um, so considering how trivial most sicknesses for me have been in the past growing up, the common cold, things like this, a day, 2 days max, for each day to get worse and worse and worse, started to concern me quite a lot. And then I got to a space where I was delirious from the fever, and I was coughing so much, it turned out that my lungs were starting to get such significant damage that my saturation level had dropped significantly. So after my first trip to Emerge, I was given a little portable O2 sat meter, and it had also a heart rate monitor. And overnight to the next day, I was as low as 78%. So then I was encouraged immediately to go back to Emerge. And then within a couple hours, I was put up to the COVID ward. And then from there, it just slowly deteriorated. So I was put on oxygen. Definitely my general comfort was taken care of with some of the classic analgesics. And then I was presented with the harsh reality that my blood work's indicating that I'm going for quite a bad cytokine storm. So the only option at the time that was presented was we need to get ahead of it with an experimental drug, tocilizumab. I've heard it pronounced 3 or 4 different ways. I hope everybody knows which drug I'm talking about. And for those that don't know what it is, essentially its function is to shut down the immune system for some period of time to prevent this cytokine storm from killing you. Now, I'm obviously not trying to educate the doctors present, but for me, it was quite a shocking reality that you'll end up being killed by your own immune system. So odds of it working, there's no guarantees. Over the last 3 months, I guess as of April, they had a lot of really positive reviews on using the drug. I also had no idea how short supply it's in. Obviously very high demand because of its efficacy, but you're posed with, you can do this, it may or may not work. If it does work, there's a chance that you'll get tuberculosis, because they had no chance to kind of go through my former gene kind of profile, and I had no clue if any of my family had it. And then of course it might not work, and then things will just continue to deteriorate back on or onto a ventilator. So considering how fast it was going and the concern the doctors had on their faces, I'm also the kind of person that I see no reason in not taking such a chance. Obviously I'm in such a bad space, the gamble's worth it if the infectious disease team is presenting me with this. So I decided on it, and then I just kind of started making peace with my mortality, which is a really weird thing to be kind of surprised with. Because at that point, you have no idea if it's just going to keep going, considering how far I'd fallen over a span of 8 days, 9 days. By the day 10, 11, it was already kind of like, I have no clue if I'm going to come out of this. I'd lost almost 30 pounds within my 4-day stay at the hospital, which is pretty shocking when the people saw me come out from what I looked like going in. The frailty, not being able to move much, obviously the lack of oxygen, I was winded within seconds of not having any O2 attached. So having that loss of strength is also pretty, I guess the best term is humbling. I'm always used to being the strong one kind of throughout my whole life. So that was really hard. And then I kind of proactively decided to just say goodbyes to people that were important to me in my life. I just started having these strange, happy flashbacks to certain people in certain times of my life that were meaningful. And I just thought I'd take the time and just say, hey, I appreciated that you did this and this for me back then. And, it was an honor to get to know you, things like that. Kind of set up a loose will of sorts with my parents just to kind of, it's not like I had one prepared. So on the off chance it didn't go well, like these are the things that I'm hoping that could be done or not done. And then within the 24-hour period, I noticed how quickly I was starting to kind of pull through. And so then the following couple of days, they left me there to be monitored. Of course, lots of antibiotics. Nothing else seemed to flare up, which was great. And then by the time I was sent home, I had lots of oxygen supply and all that. I then started to develop clots. And that was kind of the next hurdle from COVID. The first one I noticed was in my left leg and my calf. It felt relatively deep, but the pain woke me up in the morning. So I thought it could have been a cramp overnight, but muscles were supple. So it didn't seem to make too much sense, but I thought I'd monitor it over a day. And then um, hopefully no one's had a clot to anyone that's watching. But the pain was quite severe considering how relaxed everything was. So I decided to go to St. Joseph's, was closer at the time. And sure enough, they found the first one. So from their perspective at the time, they thought it was better to just monitor it. Let's check it out in the next couple of days. I think it was about a week period at the time when we had that discussion. And then all of a sudden in, I want to say 2 days post-hospital, or maybe day 3, I was having these awful chest and back pains. And the only way to describe it is it would start with a stabbing pain that kind of went from the back to the front. And as that started to increase, I would then start to like spasm around the pain. And then obviously with my coughing, it would just make the spasming worse and the tightening worse and the pain worse. And then it felt like there was just kind of spikes kind of all around my chest and back. And then that was kind of scary because I felt like numbness in my arms. I'm like, am I having a heart attack? So went into ultimately Victoria Hospital, and that's when they found I had clots everywhere. And so where specifically the CT scan showed lungs, inside, outside, throughout my back, and oddly air bubbles, or maybe not so oddly because the coughing is so violent. There's a chance that the lungs can have a slight bubble burst and then kind of reattach. Didn't see any loss in my lung capacity, I guess, as far as like a punctured lung or something like that. But that was another thing that stunned me at 31. Where did I think I'd have blood clots, let alone this many? So definitely can say that the pain I experienced during, I'd say I had 2 really bad attacks from this pain, because it was just, this spasm state would just last for hours. And I was taking hydromorphone and some Percocets just to see when it was really bad, to try and take the edge off. And even then it was just barely did anything. So for me, considering all the injuries I've had and all the things I've had to push through, definitely stunning when you're faced with that kind of level of pain. And I truly wish nobody to go through that, because it's kind of makes you go a little nuts in the moment. And then with the right blood thinners, I'd say within the first week of taking them, I noticed a significant reduction in my symptoms with my pain, and then a little bit more mobility coming back. I didn't need oxygen quite as much all the time. I could reduce the flow rate, and then 6 weeks later, from start to finish of this virus, I'm now feeling a lot more like myself. Colors back in the face, starting to put weight on again in a healthy way. Trying to jog a little bit more just to see where my lung capacity is at, and I can feel that I could probably take a 95% full breath of air, just a slight restriction on the back end. So I guess all in all, what is the sum of my experiences? I'm probably the last person anyone thought that would get sick with it, and probably absolutely the last person anyone thought that I would get that close to death with it. And of course, it stunned my family. I grew up in London, and my mother's been a nurse at UH for over 30 plus years now. Worked in intensive care, now at the cardiac recovery unit. So she was unbelievable with how well she kept everything together. I can't imagine how much fear and stuff she was trying to just kind of, hold back just to kind of be strong for me. Challenging for my dad, because for a lot of people out there that don't actually understand a lot of the consequences of the virus, especially when you get to clots, everybody instantly associates with, could go to your brain, your heart, things like this could be quite lethal. So now that I'm very much on the mend, I could see the relief in my parents' eyes quite markedly. So hopefully it didn't take off too many years of their life with that stress.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Alex. And it sounds absolutely terrifying, and I'm so glad you're with us. It's hard to imagine what kind of effect that's had on your family. At the age of 31, you mentioned you were having to talk about a will or, end of life care. Like, that's mind blowing.
Yeah, it's definitely definitely puts things into perspective, I'd say, and just kind of this overall feeling of gratitude and the things that you really want to do and focus on in your life. I think I worked with a therapist for a little while, just just to kind of come to terms with that whole process. And it's not surprising to me actually that a lot of people that do come to such life-altering events or potentially life-altering events that they completely change their lives. I mean, in my case, I wouldn't make such a rash decision, but the big thing that I did take away from it as a positive is, um, I'll tell people more often that I love them, because why wait? If tomorrow may or may not come, you might as well take those moments to tell people that you really care what you're thinking, and just really appreciate some of the connections that you can make as a person, and try to let go of the small stuff. I mean, I think those are pretty intuitive things, but it definitely becomes a lot more apparent when you come so close to losing something so precious. It's a very, yeah, it's a sobering situation. And I guess the biggest thing that I really appreciated was the people that were working on my case. It was unbelievable, the compassion, the humanity, the expertise. You could tell that they must have been running themselves ragged, not just for me, but they were probably showing just as much compassion and love for everybody else on those sick wards. And they did an absolutely incredible job. And even a lot of the nurses that were coming in and out, I'm lumping those nurses into that, not saying that this is a separate situation, but just constantly checking in, even if they didn't have to, just to, say like, hey, like my family's praying for you, or just, there's a lot of people that are just, you'll make it, just kind of think positive, things like this, and it just, it does help. Because it's just, you don't feel so isolated. And I think that'd be the worst part. I can't imagine those that didn't come through as well as I did, not even being allowed to see your family members as you're passing. I think that has to be probably the worst tragedy for the entire family, including the person that passed. Because it's kind of the best case scenario if you are dying, that you have people around you to whether say your piece or just to feel more at home. So this must have been a very, very hard time this past year plus for everybody involved, from the healthcare workers to the families that have been hardly affected by this.
Yeah, and you know what? The whole COVID-19 story is made all the more terrifying by the reality that you're the person that we associate with being the model of health, the very picture of health. I mean, you're an Olympian. You probably leap a mile in 2 seconds and think nothing of it. Well, I exaggerate a bit, but
Prior surgeries, maybe.
so coming from yourself, it's all the more impactful because you and I were chatting just the other night about all the things that we healthy people take for granted on a day-to-day basis. Even something as simple as taking a big breath of air. When you've got COVID, it can be really tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can speak a bit to a bit more, I mean, to what your recovery in the last month has been like. Have you been doing? What things are going well for you? What things do you feel are still a bit of a challenge compared to what you were like pre-COVID?
Well, I'd say just, I mean, the progression in 4 weeks has been, in the scope of 4 weeks from start to finish, has been quite quick. I mean, week 1 and 2 were slow, not really noticeable, but week 3 to 4 was pretty remarkable. And the only thing that's kind of left off is just I get winded over, let's say I'm currently at a place where I can do 2 laps around a 400-meter track, and then I'm like really winded, and I really need to kind of sit down and just let myself totally slow down, catch my breath. But that's okay. I mean, I imagine this is going to take many, many weeks to come before I can really be in a position where I can be naturally more active. I remember from the first day I was able to be without oxygen for a couple of hours at a time, I would try to take my dog for a walk, and I'd make it like maybe 500 meters, and I'd have to just stop and sit whatever I was, near me, whether it was a stare from a neighbor or anything like that. So anyone that's going through the recovery, just patience. That's the best thing I can say. Is it's an impossible thing to practice, especially when you're in it. I feel like I was trapped in my house for so many weeks. But just patience. And I mean, I've been through some pretty serious injury recoveries, and the difference with this is just you truly feel completely sapped of energy, right? It's a whole body trauma. And yeah, just to take it really slow, and not to rush off the oxygen, I suppose. I mean, they'll be the 2 things I'd recommend.
Yeah, and for yourself, it must be especially frustrating because you're at a much higher level than most of us at the best at the best of times, right? So, you know, there are a lot of us who, I consider myself, for example, in pretty decent health, right? But I take for granted not being winded when I go for a walk around the block, right? And that's
For
the
sure.
sort of thing that, we take for granted. When you get COVID, there's a possibility that, you'll wind up with this, these long-term sequelae. Speaking of which, have you experienced, a lot of people talk about the COVID fog. Have you noticed that it's just hard to focus or anything like that?
Hard to say. Speaking to someone with ADHD, I mean, having a hard time focusing is already kind of in my wheelhouse. So I wouldn't say I've noticed anything drastic, but let's take that 4 week block, for example. I would be completely whipped, wiped, no energy around 4 p.m., 6 p.m. And it'd be something simple as having a conversation. So if I spoke for, let's say, an hour with somebody, the constant, you don't realize how much oxygen and energy it takes just using your lungs to form sentences. And then after that, I'd just be totally drained, and then that would be kind of it. I feel like I'd fall asleep on the couch or something, and then that was my day. So yeah, it's just, I mean, obviously, hey, you need your oxygen to survive, but when you're not having that 98% saturation, it's stunning how much functionality you lose.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you and I had a great conversation about vaccine hesitancy. And,
Hmm.
the topic du jour is the exact opposite of that, right? So, the
Yep.
irony is here we are having this discussion about vaccine hesitancy, and everyone is clamoring to get COVID-19 vaccine and complaining they can't get it fast enough, right? But if you look to our neighbors south of the border, WebMD, for example, tells us about 20% of Americans are still reluctant to get that COVID shot. And, in the weeks and the months to come, getting people vaccinated against COVID is going to be a critical part of our overall public health strategy in terms of getting getting our caseload under control and hopefully preventing those adverse consequences of COVID-19 infection, the kind that land you in the ICU unit, the kind that, leave you winded when you're going for a short walk around the block without oxygen. Um, and you had some pointed words when you spoke with me about, the folks who don't want to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And there are a lot of concerns out there. What would you say to all the folks in the community who might be saying to themselves right now, yeah, okay, well, that was just it was a one-off case, that's not going to happen to me. What would you say to folks like that?
Well, I mean, I guess the best thing I could say is just try to use an example. Um, and one of the examples used when we spoke last night is one of my family members, my dad's brother, one of his older brothers, has polio, or I guess had polio and just now has the effects of polio. And it all happened because their mother wasn't fast enough to get him vaccinated. And that's something that he's now living with his entire life. So, what's the difference in this scenario? We have something that's going to affect us. We don't know quite to what extent. You might survive the virus or have trivial symptoms, but what's to say the people that you interact with get my level symptoms? Are you willing to live with the fact that you are potentially responsible? I mean, I don't know if that's morally or ethically correct, but you would be literally a portion as to why that person has died or passed on to family members that they died. And that's a pretty heavy thought to consider. And the social responsibility, I think, it doesn't seem that it's quite clear the level of magnitude of the damage that can happen if we're a little bit too lax on how we're interacting with people, especially if we're not wanting to get the vaccine. Um, but ultimately, the survival of some of the greatest diseases that have plagued mankind, we don't have them anymore because of vaccines. And so this is just a matter of course. And now it's just our generation is going through this process where we have now a new global threat, and we have to work together to try and keep everybody safe. One of my old colleagues from Germany, just in school there, we had a conversation weeks ago, and he was saying how, Alex, it's unbelievable that, we're at a place in time right now that what I do here in Germany matters to what happens to people somewhere else. And he says, people don't understand that level of magnitude. And we're not even just saying just like, oh, like a butterfly effect, but quite literally, um, a lack of diligence on being safe or getting the vaccine and you interact with somebody that's on their way somewhere, or maybe you're that person on their way somewhere, and now um, geometric sequence, boom, you've now infected hundreds of people um, with one interaction, and it's a scary thought. I mean, I had no clue, you know, that I was getting so sick so quickly, but I had passed it on to four people, and I had to contact them almost immediately once I had my results. And thankfully, they were able to keep themselves isolated from people. But right there, that could have been a huge outbreak in hopefully concentrated areas. But then there's a gravity to that, you know, being the person that's carried that in. Um, and then there's of course the I'm not saying that I've been subject to any of the stigma, but you know, it's you're viewed as like a dirty person. You know, you're a person that nobody wants to interact with and keep distance from. You know, are you sure you're free of COVID? Are you sure things are okay? And it's like, well, you know, it's been, you know, it's 8 weeks now. The doctors have obviously given me the green light. You don't have to see me, or we don't have to walk, or we don't have to be 6 feet away. I mean, I'll respect your choices, but at the same time, it's not like I chose to get sick, and I certainly didn't choose to give it to anybody else, and I certainly had no choice in who gave it to me. I don't even know who did and how, and hence why likely it was in an airport, because what else can I say? Uh, yeah, I think getting the vaccine is just extremely important, and I think the biggest problem is just a lack of education on why was it possible to be made so fast. I mean, to me, it's no different than saying, let's take a huge industrial movement in time. We entered World War II. All of a sudden, we had thousands of tanks and this and that, and nobody batted an eye at how impossible it was to make that. You know, wouldn't people be wondering if they're all held together by one screw? No, they were solid, ready to go because there was a need. And so the whole world's getting together on this project, and we're applying techniques. You know, the mRNA portion, unfortunately for a lot of people, becomes this unimaginable thing that if I'm scared of GMOs and I'm entering a thing that's modifying my genes, there's a lot of fear with that. And it's almost as if we never had enough time to quite get to that level to truly have the, you know, the population catch up with a pretty standard level of understanding of these things. I mean, I miss the days of Bill Nye and Popular Mechanics for Kids, when you had all this regular science interaction. And so by the time you were more of an adult, you're like, oh yeah, that's how that works, and yeah, it should be like this. And we seem to be very anti science in the last I'd say 10 years or so. I mean, I'm sure you guys would probably agree with that range, maybe plus minus a couple of years, but yeah, I'm not really sure what else I could kind of add to that. The biggest thing that's I think just so critical is, yeah, just getting on board and just getting this thing done. And unfortunately, this isn't a foe that we can point at and shoot at and punch. It's an invisible thing, and we just have to just simply get together and just make the right decision. And you know, these are the kind of sacrifices where wearing a mask, I think, is ridiculous compared to some of the things that, you know, my father grew up in a communist country. You know, those were hard times for a lot of reasons, and it had nothing to do with sicknesses. It was literally social injustices. And so here we have the opportunity to say, yeah, I can put on a mask, and that's a pretty simple thing to do. And I guess the final thing, and we touched on this last night, it's too bad that we've had so many specialists that have literally slaved in their fields for decades, trying to, you know, give this information in a way that's consumable, and it requires people that are a little bit more of a social figure to regurgitate a fraction of that information for everyone else to go like, oh yeah, that sounds terrible. So from that first CBC interview, a lot of people just kind of chimed in and said, like, you wouldn't believe how many people have gotten the vaccine or wanted to after they saw your situation. And unfortunately, I'm not the only one who've gotten that sick. I'm not the only one that almost died or has died or things like this. It's sad that we haven't had a chance to really value each and every life that's been lost to this disease and make those proactive decisions immediately. But we're in a space where we're turning it around. The rates are lower almost daily. I think we're trending in a very good way. So hopefully we can keep up that momentum and get back to a place where this is hopefully eradicated. Unlikely, but if it becomes as trivial as the common seasonal flu, that would be nice. Yeah, we got to band together.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing those thoughts, Alex. And I'm going to pick up 2 points that you mentioned. One, stigma. Thanks for speaking about it and normalizing it. and validating the experiences of people who experience COVID-19, because there are a lot of people who, you know, are experiencing that sense of shame. They don't want to share their stories. And it's important that those stories come out in the weeks to come, because let's face it, people get sick. Sometimes, even with taking proper precautions, stuff happens. And, um, we have to give our patients safe spaces in which to share their stories, so that we can collectively come to an understanding of how we're going to prevent this caseload from getting completely out of control. Um, it,
Absolutely.
and the second piece, the really important piece that you spoke to, is a great lead into Dr. Summers, and it's the whole social responsibility piece. That when you get vaccinated, you're not doing it just to protect yourself. You're doing it to protect a community. You're doing it so that you hopefully, there are such things as asymptomatic spreaders, and
Mhm.
if you get infected with the virus, you hopefully will not spread it on to other people. So there are two really important aspects to getting vaccinated. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Dr. Summers, I had, as we were sharing briefly before, uh, this excellent Zoom presentation, we were talking about the animation I put together showing, how an epidemic can quickly become out of control, uh, even with an R naught of 3.0, like a very small basic reproduction number. I probably lost a lot of Londoners right there. The reproduction number is the number of people. It's a number of people who will get infected by one person who's infected with COVID-19. So if you have, say, a basic reproductive number of 3, it means that one person, you introduce them in the community, they get 3 people infected with COVID-19. So we were talking briefly about how an epidemic can quickly get out of control in the absence of vaccination and public health measures. It's a great lead into Dr. Summers, and we're going to switch over to flip through my very excellent animation. I know you guys are missing all the smiley faces, and I'm sorry, but in the interest of time, we're going to skip through and introduce Dr. Alex Summers, who really does not need any introduction. He's the Associate Medical Officer of Health here in the Middlesex London Health Unit. Dr. Summers, please just cue me when you want me to advance a slide. Thanks.
And thanks to you for pulling this together, and to the London and District Academy of Medicine for putting this on. And thanks to Alex for sharing a story and his story. One of the challenges that we have at the health unit, and we're going to go through numbers today and talk about case counts and talk about epi curves and talk about trends. But Alex, you remind us today that every single one of those numbers is a story and an experience, and a tough story and a tough experience. Your courage in sharing what you went through cannot be understated. I'm 33, my friend. We're the same age, and that fear of mortality that you've experienced is not something that many people our age experience, and it's not something that's going to leave you for a while. And to share that story is courageous, and we thank you for it. And I thank you for it. It's huge.
Thanks very much for saying so.
The pandemic has now been part of our lives and part of our world for what will be 18 months very soon. And for those of us who've been working in the field, it's now hard at times to imagine what life was before this and what life might look like afterwards. But I was reflecting this past weekend as the weather in London began to become a little bit nicer out. It was a beautiful weekend. And as we could see people gathering outdoors more or spending time outdoors, and as we saw case counts come down and vaccine coverage rates go up, that I do think that for the first time in a long time, the wind is at our backs now. We've been walking into the wind for a while, but I think the wind is at our backs. And a key part of that is this vaccine story and this vaccine miracle that we need to continue to talk about. And we'll highlight some of the questions that are on people's minds about that. But the single most important thing we can do now is pick up the mantle of that vaccine. And at this point, everybody's eligible. And so the vaccine supply is coming. It is here. You're eligible. And that, I think, is exciting. So we'll talk about what the landscape's looking like here in London, but it cannot be understated how important that'll be. Jared, if we could go on to the next slide, that would be great. So I am going to provide a bit of an update on why I'm thinking about the wind in our backs, talking about our local COVID situation, and then we'll talk about the vaccine a little bit. Next slide. So the next few slides will be even more instructive, but I provide surveillance reports twice a week at least, if not more often. And it is staggering when you think of over 168 million COVID cases worldwide. And that is a profound underestimation too. When we look at some countries in the world for whom the testing infrastructure isn't as robust as it would be here, we know that that number is substantially lower than what we would likely know if we had full testing capacity in some of those countries. 3.5 million deaths reported worldwide. And here in London, that's a total of 218. We're reporting one new death today. And I think it's important to note that that death was amongst somebody who was 24 years old. And as much as this pandemic has certainly seen people of older ages die, we know that people of all ages get sick. And I think, Alex, your story is a reminder of that. Next slide, please. The spring has really been concerning because of the variants. The predominant strain of COVID-19 in our community is the B117 variant, which was the variant originally identified in the UK. It's now takes and would contribute to 80% or more of all the strains of COVID we would see in our community. We've had a couple of strains. We've had more than a couple strains of the Brazilian variant, and we've had now 2 strains travel associated with the variant originally identified in India, and that's the B1617. And that strain is certainly causing concern. It appears to respond to the vaccine, but there's always concerns that one of these strains will be a vaccine escapee, which means that the vaccine won't be as effective against it. Now, most of the mutations over time, it appears as though, no, the vaccine still does the job. But it highlights, and again, I want to pick up on Alex's point, that a pandemic isn't over till it's over everywhere. And one of the reasons that that's true, not just because of the humanity of it all, by the way, but because the more that we see the virus circulate globally, the greater the chance of a mutation. The more that these viruses can replicate, the more the probability that an error can happen during that replication, which leads to the mutations. So the more activity that happens in a country like India or Brazil or Uruguay, the more the probability of a mutation which can affect us all. The global health impacts of this pandemic, the equity questions of vaccine distribution globally are huge. We have had, the vaccine rollout since January has been, a hard one here in Canada because the vaccine supply just hasn't been as robust as we would have wanted. That being said, globally, we are well and beyond every other country on the most part with regards to access to vaccine. We're very fortunate that way, but we will very soon have to turn our eyes to making sure that our global neighbors are supported as well, not just for our reasons, but because it's the right thing to do. Next slide. This is this epi curve, an epidemiologic curve that reports case numbers over time. And I would highlight again that each bar here and each number represents a story like Alex's. It's remarkable to go back to the March to May of 2020 and look at what that first wave was relative to a second wave and relative to a third. That third wave as well, what we just experienced, would have been probably twice the size if it wasn't for the vaccine. So that third wave was bad. It would have been worse. And the reason that it isn't worse is because we were able to vaccinate our older population largely before that third wave, hit. And I think that speaks not only to just what a ride it has been, but also how impactful this vaccine is on our exit strategy out of this pandemic. Critical to this epi curve is that the third wave has been a slow decline, but it is a decline nonetheless. And certainly week by week, day by day, we continue to see a reduction in the transmission that we see in our community. It's really important that we finish the race. So, the last 10 meters of any race is the hardest. And that's the stage that we're in right now. We are desperate to have this over, and we can continue our success in that if we are able to keep wearing those masks, keep getting our vaccine, keep holding the distance for a little bit longer, and we will actually experience a very different fall than we did the last 18 months. Next slide. And a big part of that is the vaccine. And this data is available on the Health Unit website all the time. And we update it every Tuesday based off of data up to the Saturday before it. So this is up to last Saturday, May 22nd. So we've already had a good 5 to 6 days of work since Saturday. And you can see the cumulative increase in the number of vaccines delivered in our region. And this includes pharmacies, a majority going through our mass vaccination clinics. We delivered over 250,000 vaccines in the region. That's enough for essentially half of everybody that lives in the Middlesex London region. And a majority of those have been first doses. And the reason that we've been using what's called the first dose strategy is that that first dose does a lot of heavy lifting, particularly on hospitalization and death. And so by taking a first dose strategy, we were able to get coverage out to more people right off the bat. And we'll be obviously having to circle back for second doses over the course of the summer, but 250,000 doses, and we continue to see that number up and up every week. Next slide. This is the really exciting slide. And Alex and Gerard were speaking about vaccine hesitancy and confidence in the vaccine. I hope that the trends we are seeing to date hold fast, because the surveys that have been done across Canada suggest that as we sit here today, well over 80% of all Canadians are ready to get the vaccine. I want that to be 100, of course, but we have to we have to actually show that we're ready to put in the work to make that a reality. Herd immunity is that concept where we're actually able to prevent a disease from circulating in our community because collectively we're all protecting. And that we're also protecting the people that can't get vaccinated or the people for whom the vaccine isn't as effective because their immune system doesn't mount the immune response that they would wish. That herd immunity, 75, 80% at the minimum is where we want to get to. And what we're seeing right now is by age demographic, we are seeing people, over 80% of them, take the vaccine. And so when we look at this graph, 80 plus is those over the age of 80, 88% of them have received a single vaccine. And you see that trend continue as we go through the different age cohorts. And the reason that the upper age cohorts have higher vaccine coverage at this point is because they had eligibility to this vaccine earlier on, of course, whereas at the lower end, your 18 to 24-year-olds, only a quarter of them have been vaccinated, but that, of course, is because they've only recently been eligible. Our goal is for every single age cohort to exceed that 80% mark. We're almost there, probably already are, given that we've had a few days that have come on since last Saturday, where everybody over the age of 60, 80% of them have received a single dose. That's awesome. The question is, are people, Alex and mine age, going to step up to the plate as well? We're the folks for whom, it's very clear that those over the age of 70 are at higher risk of dying. So of course, the impetus to get the vaccine is high. Is it as high for people like Alex and I? And I think Alex's story highlights how powerfully that reason actually exists, but we need to know it and we need to act on it. And so what we are looking at right now is how can we ensure that people who are under the age of 40 are stepping up to the plate and getting that vaccinated. You're now eligible. You've had to wait the longest, but you're now eligible and it's time to go. We're at a point where nearly 55% of all residents over 18 are vaccinated now that the Pfizer vaccine is eligible for those over age 12, we'll be adjusting our denominator here and aiming for those 12 plus and what the proportion of them that have received a single dose. It's a small number who have been receiving 2 doses, and I'll talk about what the second dose strategy is going to look like over the course of the summer. But what we're really looking for is how can we get to that 80% across the board? And so it is really people in that 40 below cohort who need to say yes to that vaccine. Next slide, if you could. And this is just that cumulative curve that continues to rise and rise and rise as we look at the percent of residents who are getting vaccinated over time. Next slide. What's cool to see is the week by week jump. So if you look to the box on the left-hand side, that's 61.1%. So 61.1% are the percent of adults age 50 to 54 who've received a first dose as of Saturday. The cool thing is that that's a 14.7% jump from the week before. That's how quickly these age cohorts are jumping up. You look at adults 45 to 49, 8% increase. 40 to 44, 7% increase. 35 to 39, 8% increase. We're having week by week massive jumps in vaccine willingness. And so for those of you who are sitting on the fence and wondering about this, your neighbors are certainly engaging in this. Your neighbors are saying yes to this vaccine. They're doing it for themselves, but they're also critically doing it for you. And I think there is a fairness question here. Are you willing to do it for your neighbor too? And I hope people see the fact that everybody's stepping up here and that we all can really step up to do this together. Next slide. The vaccine process, I mean, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about the vaccine development process and what the finished products are. It is a miracle, and yet it's not, that we sit here today with vaccines available for us, and good ones too. The mRNA vaccine is the first time that we've been able to actually use it, but this will revolutionize vaccination programs moving forward for other disease, not just COVID. But as Alex mentioned, the reason that we saw vaccines turn around so quickly is because we had a singular global effort in this, unlike what we've been able to do for vaccine programs for years and years. And I hope that this actually spurs us on to come up with a vaccine for HIV. We're seeing an advance in vaccines for malaria now, which will have a massive impact on global health across Africa in particular. I hope that we see the robust response like we've seen for the COVID-19 vaccine. We now have 4 vaccines available in North America. 2 of them are mRNA vaccines and 2 of them are viral vector vaccines. Pfizer and Moderna are, for all intents and purposes, interchangeable vaccines. There's this remarkable thing that's arising, which just makes me shake my head, where people are preferentially choosing Pfizer over Moderna and actually walking away from the opportunity to get Moderna. I got to tell you, it makes no sense at all. I'm a Moderna man myself, and I would do it again. Take whichever one you can get. I have no idea how that's transpired. Apparently, it's a TikTok thing, and I will admit, despite still being in the younger age demographic, and I don't know, Alex, if you can attest to this, TikTok somewhat escapes me. I have to admit, I don't know or understand it.
Well, I'll say between that and all the Reddit pharmacologists and virologists, I mean, I think we've had enough. Just to add to your one point with the global effort, we don't bat an eye when we say, hey, Google, turn on my lights. But when everybody uses all that same technology to make a virus, I mean, or a vaccine, it's all of a sudden conspiracy and 5G chips. Anyways.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the things we know about people that are hesitant to get the vaccine is there are a few folks out there who will never get the vaccine. And hey, but there's a few folks out there who've got questions and who wonder, and fair enough. Let's talk about those. The process by which these vaccines are approved across the world and in Canada is the most robust evidence-reviewed process for any single medication or medical intervention in the world. No single medication is as regulated, monitored, or observed as a vaccine. The process here in Canada is that we receive through Health Canada all the evidence on the trials that a vaccine goes through in order to be assessed to be safe and effective. So you've heard about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. The phase 1 and 2 trials actually aren't really looking at the effectiveness of the vaccine. They spend all their time looking at the safety of the vaccine. And it is until the vaccine is considered safe that we even start having conversations about whether it's effective or not. Once we know it's safe, then we can start talking about effectiveness. And the phase 3 trials that are done on Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Janssen are the ones where we do it on tens of thousands of people. So Pfizer and Moderna, each of those studies had about 40,000 participants. And the remarkable effectiveness is just amazing. Once that is, those phase 3 trials are done, that evidence is presented to Health Canada. Health Canada reviews everything in depth. That's independent. There's no political involvement there. There's no industry involvement there. And if it's deemed to be safe and effective, it's approved. And then we as a public health world start to talk about how to use it. And even while we're using it, we actually have a very robust system for looking for adverse events. And that's where we saw some of the blood clots associated with AstraZeneca. Now, causation is a very different thing than association, but we respond to association when it comes to adverse events following vaccination because we want to make sure they're safe. So the AstraZeneca, as you know, there's been lots of review on those blood clots. One of the things we've said, and Alex, your story speaks to this, is that the risk of getting blood clots if you get COVID-19 is remarkably higher than the risk of getting a blood clot associated with AstraZeneca. And we see that. But it's important for us to take the review to see whether or not the benefit of a vaccine is worth it. And for all of these vaccines, the benefit is. One of the reasons that we put the pause on AstraZeneca is because Pfizer and Moderna were available, and so we could afford to take the pause. However, what I think we will likely find is that the benefit of AstraZeneca is still far outweighs the risk, particularly for COVID-19. What we have available for significant numbers in the population is the mRNA vaccines, though. And both, as I mentioned, Pfizer and Moderna are essentially equal with regards to how effective and safe they are in preventing not only symptoms and hospitalizations, but also transmissions associated with COVID. So these will be remarkable tools in our toolbox. The AstraZeneca vaccine will, I think, also be put back into rotation for us. Second doses are going to start to be rolled out to people in our region. Right now, second doses of AstraZeneca are available for those who got their first dose in one of the hot spots in mid-March. And in time, it's going to be available in our region as well through pharmacies and primary care. Right now, you can go on to covidvaccinelm.ca and you can book an appointment for Pfizer or Moderna. And I encourage you all to do it. It's really easy. Our online booking system is super simple and you can get an appointment very quickly. The second dose at the moment for most people is going to be at 4 months scheduled. But what we are going to see is that by the time mid-June, end of June is done, our first dose strategy will be done. We'll have 80% of our population with a first dose, and we'll be spending a lot of time as a health unit of trying to find those remaining 20% to get them vaccinated. But what it's going to mean, I think, for the summer is that most people's vaccines are going to be moved up. And so our hope is by mid to end of September that we're going to have a lot of people vaccinated with 2 doses. It's going to be really important that you come back for your second dose. The first dose does a lot of the heavy lifting. The second dose finishes the job. And the second dose is going to really be what's going to allow for us to be confident in getting back to living like we used to live, but hopefully with some more infection prevention and control practices as part of our normal way of living. I get lots of questions as to whether or not we're going to wear masks forever, and I don't know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that the wearing of masks and the washing of hands has been remarkable in reducing other infectious diseases that are respiratory transmitted in our community. We had not a single case, not a single documented case of influenza this year. Not a single one. Part of that is because of tremendous vaccine uptake for the flu vaccine last fall. Part of it's because of mask wearing, and part of it's because of just amazing hand hygiene, plus some of the physical distancing. So I hope that there is some of that learning that we take into our years ahead, because lots of people die from flu every year too. But regardless, when we think of getting back to Olympic Games and hockey games at Bud Gardens or hanging out at a pub, the vaccine's going to be the difference maker in all of this. And so we really look forward to people taking up the mantle to get that done. Jared, I think those are my slides from what I can recall. So I'll pass things back to you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Summers. Thank you, Alex, for sharing a very, very powerful story publicly about your experience of COVID helping us get the word out, that it's, and emphasizing really the importance of getting vaccinated against this disease. Um, Parting thoughts at the top of the hour are arguably this is a modern success story for public health. If you think of it, it's probably the first time in history, Dr. Summers, correct me if I'm wrong, that we've gotten uh, a global pandemic of this magnitude under control with a measure of public health measures. And when you throw in vaccination on top of that, it really does make a powerful difference. Um, I was going to bore Londoners with ideas like, basic reproduction number of the virus, and you thankfully spared them tech talk for me. I mean, it's so tempting when you get two doctors in a room to talk shop. So I'm sure all of London thanks you, thanks you for that. And Alex, wow, what a powerful story. So important to hear it firsthand from you. Um, I guess, parting thoughts about vaccine hesitancy, Dr. Summers. I noticed, even in the 80 plus age group, and I've been following your public health presentations for a long time now. I'm one of those anonymous people that hangs out in the corner of the room. It's been around the same level of vaccination for quite some time now, and that data would correspond closely to the Canadian data that you refer to, and it would also correspond to some of the data that we're seeing coming out of the U.S., where about 20% of the population is uncomfortable with the idea of getting a shot. And if you ask them, what are your number one reasons for not getting a vaccine? A lot of them will point to the side effects. And I can speak briefly to side effects. I think it's a lot more powerful if it comes from you. Can you maybe speak a bit about towards that piece of vaccine hesitancy, and reassuring folks who have that degree of concern about the shot what to expect when they get their COVID vaccine?
Yeah. So every single vaccine that we use, the purpose is to kind of jumpstart your immune system into developing those antibodies, so that when you see the real thing, your body is able to react instantaneously to it. And so the side effects that we commonly see with a vaccine, or any vaccine, and certainly we've seen it with the COVID vaccines as well, are that kind of initial immune response. So fatigue over the course of the 24 to 48 hours. Some may develop a fever. Certainly pain at the injection site is exceptionally calm. When I got my COVID vaccine, my arm was sore for 24 hours, and then it went away. And I think, in the same, again, we've got the privilege of having Alex with us today. For those and all of us at some point in time have, gone for a big walk, gone for a big run, or maybe some of us have actually worked out before or trained for something physical. When we go and train for something physical, we anticipate the fatigue associated with that training. We sometimes even anticipate that pain associated with the muscles of being put to work. That's what your body's doing when those side effects kick in. That's your body saying, yeah, we're putting in the work right now. We're doing the training right now. So when the real game shows up, we're ready to go, and we don't even have to think about it. So those side effects are your immune system doing their training. And I actually don't think that's really a simplification of the process. That is truly what this experience is. So it is about your body learning to respond. So fever, some fatigue, certainly pain at the injection site, those are exceptionally common. They go away. What we haven't seen, and I'm going to, AstraZeneca I spoke a little bit about, but let's talk about Pfizer and Moderna. We've now had millions of Canadians, let alone millions of people across the globe, receive Pfizer and Moderna. We have not seen a significant signal for a serious side effect. We have not seen death associated with these vaccines. We have not seen significant hospitalizations associated with this vaccine at a rate amongst those who received the vaccine that we would anticipate in somebody who didn't receive the vaccine. It has been remarkable with regards to the limited serious adverse events that have been associated. And we have not seen a strong signal at all regarding the safety concerns of side effects from these vaccines. I think the sincerity is to say, absolutely, your arm's going to hurt. You're going to feel like you maybe got hit by a bus. You're going to be tired. Absolutely, absolutely. But I think most of us would take that to avoid the experience that Alex just described, let alone take it to protect our loved ones, our neighbors, and all that stuff. So the confidence with which I can speak about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines is kind of amazing, actually. Again, millions of people, and the robust surveillance systems that's in place for these vaccines is amazing, and we have not seen it. We just have not seen a strong safety signal that suggests concern with these vaccines.
Thanks for that, Dr. Summers. We've had a veritable flood of questions come in, and we've had such an excellent discussion that I was loath to interrupt you, especially yourself, Alex, when you were telling your story. I wonder if, with our producer's blessing, if we can continue for a bit, or shall we continue, Scott? Or we shall continue. Excellent, thank you. So a lot of these questions, Alex, were for yourself. So there's a question coming in from Jamie. Can you tell us about the hospital environment, your treatment, how you felt while you were getting your treatment?
I'd say overall it was extremely positive, and the biggest part of the most positive experience was once I got put up to the COVID floor, fourth floor at UH. That's when you really see everybody is just switched on and fully in. I do imagine there's quite a lot of fatigue of people at the emergency, like at emergence, people wandering in, whether they're legit symptoms or not, or in pain or not in pain. And I think perhaps there might be room for ways to kind of offset some of that fatigue, just to kind of keep people as fresh with their humanity as some of the people on the other floors. But I would definitely say overall, the entire group, I mean, when there's a sick person involved, I mean, there's so much want to help and to heal, and truly, even like through, I'd say, like I had 2 very dark emotional days, and they cried alongside with me. That takes a human being with a lot of carrying capacity, and that doesn't come cheaply. It saps your energy quite a lot. And so to be so engaged for so long for so many patients, I mean, a lot of these people truly are being, I'd say, undervalued with how much they're giving of themselves. I mean, this is the equivalent of soldiers being sent to a war. I mean, this is their time to step up and really kind of make these differences. And it's thanks to a lot of those people that the recoveries are coming as quickly as they are.
Thanks, Alex. Kara, Dr. Summers, Kara had a question for you. What do you think has been the biggest contributor to the COVID-19 numbers in London?
So maybe I'll answer that question in 2 parts. One is, what has caused them to go up? What has caused them to go down? We have, consistently seen transmission amongst people who probably know each other. So those social gatherings or transient social interactions, and I would use that explanation even in workplaces as well, is where transmission can happen. We often talk in our case management or contact tracing management teams about the moments where your guard is let down. And for many, it's, again, and I think we've highlighted on this tonight, like, nobody chooses to get sick nor to spread it on, right? Life comes at you quick. There's lots going on, and there's so much that you can't control. And what we find is that every single one of us has moments where we had less than 2 meters of distance with somebody with whom we do not live, or that masks weren't being worn the right way. Of course, we don't have perfection in all this stuff. And for many of us, fortunately, the transmission doesn't happen there. But for some, it does. And where we've seen transmission is in indoor environments where people are in close quarters, particularly if masks aren't worn, and particularly if there's a familiarity, because that's where you start to drop down your guard. And we've seen that time and time again. What has resulted in case numbers coming down are where physical distancing and the opportunities for people to let their guard down are diminished. So when we are able to, and this is where public health work is, and some of the public health measures are really hard, right? We're taking away people's opportunity to do what on any other given year we'd want you to do, which is to socialize, be engaged emotionally and mentally with others, and all those important things. We take those opportunities away so that people's guards can't come down so easily. Physical distancing has made an absolutely massive impact. And so when we're able to reduce non-essential social interactions or non-essential work interactions, we see a massive reduction in cases. The other thing that's made a huge difference, and I want to talk about long-term care and retirement homes in particular, has been the vaccination program. So when we go back to the second wave, you can see the death rate in our second wave was substantially higher. And that's because those who were admitted or living in long-term care and retirement homes were prone to outbreaks because they live in close quarters with others and they are vulnerable to death from COVID-19. We're not seeing that anymore. And the settings haven't really changed that much, but the vaccination status did. And that will be what will take us home.
Thanks. We had another question from Paul. You're going to love this one, Dr. Summers. Do you have an opinion or information about which vaccine is the best? Should people wait for one in particular to get the best result?
Yeah. So I spoke about the mRNA vaccines and then the viral vector vaccines. So I'll talk a little bit about the mRNA vaccines. Moderna and Pfizer are, for all intents and purposes, interchangeable vaccines, with regards to which one you should take. They are absolutely interchangeable. Their effectiveness from their phase 3 trials were equivocal, i.e. the same. The safety profile is the same. And the effectiveness in the real world from those vaccines have been the same. So whichever one you get your hands on first, you take. Full stop, end of discussion. The mRNA vaccines, in contrast to the viral vector vaccines, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization has indicated a preference for the mRNA vaccines. So if the mRNA vaccines are available to you, that has been a preferential guidance to take those relative to other vaccines. Now, when we go back even 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, there was many for whom AstraZeneca was the option available to you, and delaying getting that vaccine was not something we recommended. Get the first one available to you. And that's still our story. Get the first one available to you. The reality is right now, the first one available to you is an mRNA vaccine, and that's the preference from NACI. But between Pfizer and Moderna, I could not care less which one you take. Could not care. What I do care is if you turn one of them down for the sake of another. That would drive me absolutely bananas. So either one of them, go for it. And to note, for those of you who did get that AstraZeneca back 3 to 4 weeks ago or more, you made the right call. Absolutely. We unequivocally avoided hospitalizations and death because people took AstraZeneca. And the risk of blood clot associated with getting a second dose of that appears to be substantially lower than the risk of getting the first one, which was low to start with. So feel confident in getting your second dose. My dad, on my strong encouragement, got AstraZeneca because that was the first available to him. And he will also be strongly encouraged to get his second dose as well, which he will, because he pays attention to the science and he listens to me.
Excellent. Excellent that he listens to you.
That's a rarity.
Well,
Fathers listening to sons.
On something.
All right. Lakshmi had a question for yourself, Alex K. How has your recovery gone? Are you back to full health or are you still experiencing side effects?
Yeah, recovery has been, I'd say overall really great. And if I was just to put a random metric to it, I'd say I feel about 95%. So I'm definitely fully functional.
You know, it's after you described your harrowing experience, it's actually such a relief, Alex, to see you sitting there looking as comfortable as you are, because it sounded like it was an absolute nightmare. So I'm so grateful you're feeling better.
You know, the funny thing is that, you know, finally my body's doing what it's supposed to do, you know, being super awesome and healthy and healing quick.
Right.
Where was that 4 weeks ago, damn it?
So another question, and I guess this one's tailored more to Dr. Summers. Should people who have had COVID get a vaccine? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is yes. The likelihood that people who've previously had COVID-19 get infected again is very, very low. So very, very low. We have not seen many reinfections. However, they've happened rarely. And again, the risks of getting this vaccine are minuscule, to the point of almost no risk. So,
Dr. Summers, just considering in my case, just to expand on that, would we also require 2 rounds of vaccine?
Great question. At this point, yes. I think that there's going to be some emerging evidence around whether or not we need to do 2 doses, or whether 1 dose essentially acts as that booster to the system that's already got antibodies for COVID. So the second dose is always about the booster. And so for somebody who's already had COVID, essentially the first dose is the booster. Do they need a second one? That's emerging, Alex. And I think by the time people who have had COVID previously are eligible, a majority of them are eligible, we'll have some clarification. But as it stands, we're vaccinating people who've had COVID with 2 full doses. So in long-term care, as an example, residents of long-term care who had COVID when there was an outbreak have now at this point received 2 doses of COVID vaccine and have tolerated that reasonably well. And again, those side effects we've seen, again, sometimes when your body mounts a robust immune response, your side effects might be a little bit more severe. And by severe, I just mean a little bit more intense for that first 24 to 48 hours. And the same thing may happen, Alex, to you when you get a first dose of vaccine, because your body's like, oh, I know what this is. No, we are not messing around with this. That's a good thing. But again, people who've had COVID are, yes, certainly recommended to get the vaccine, and at this point, the full series.
Right. And would you anticipate after that second dose, they have even more of a response to the vaccine compared to someone who hadn't had it? COVID?
Potentially. And again, is that a a stand-in for a robust immune response? Potentially and likely. And again, what I want to highlight though is that those are the transient pain at the site, fever, fatigue types of symptoms, not the severe cause you to be ill or die type of symptoms in the long run. It's interesting. Early on, the Pfizer and Moderna trials certainly suggested that people had worse or more intense mild side effects with the second dose because they had a better immune response the second time around. I would say on the whole, like, it's kind of a coin toss as to whether or not your symptoms are worse after the first shot or the second shot. So on the whole, the good news is that whether they're worse the first time or the second time or worse both, they go away and then you're immune, which is great.
Right. And while we're on the subject of the immune response after the second shot, maybe you can speak a bit to, because the other bone of contention has been, why are these doses spread 4 months apart? So I understand the theory behind that, in terms of having a more robust antibody response. And we have some data coming out of the UK suggesting in older adults, at the 3-month mark, you have a more robust response. But I wonder if you could give a more fulsome answer to our audience.
Yeah, so the decision to delay the second dose of vaccine was grounded in a few different principles. The first was in our experience with all multi-series vaccines or multi-dose vaccine series. So any vaccine in which we have to give you more than 1 dose, we always know that it's better to give it late than early, because the concern is that if we give it too early, your body hasn't had a chance to mount the immune response we want to the first dose to actually get the booster effect for the second dose. So every single multi-series vaccine that we've ever had to deal with, it's always been better late than early. And in fact, sometimes the booster is even better if we do it later on, because your body is able to mount a better response to the first vaccine you got, and that booster appears to be more effective and longer lasting. So that's kind of foundational understanding of these multi-series vaccines. The theory was that that would also apply with the COVID vaccine.
The other thing that was known from the phase 3 trials of the COVID vaccine was that the first dose did a lot of heavy lifting, such that the marginal additional protection you got from that second dose was there, but it wasn't massive. What was also clear is that although there was some waning in immunity following that first dose, it appeared to happen 2 to 3 and maybe even 4 months out, as opposed to within the first couple of weeks. So when we looked at the population level, what we saw was that if we extend out the second dose, we are going to have more first doses to give to people, and we will actually get more net protection to the population by giving that dose to somebody who hasn't had one than giving 2 doses to somebody else. The modeling that was done suggested that thousands of lives would be saved by getting more people a first dose, as opposed to giving less people 2 doses. I think that it will bore out to be true. And so both on the kind of the virology and vaccinology level, as well as the population modeling level, it became clear that providing first dose to as many people as possible would be the best way we can mount robust protection. The other big thing is that that first dose appears to play a huge role in reducing hospitalization and death. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to avoid in as many people as possible as well. I think the reality is that 4 months is not going to be the wait time for a majority of people. It's going to be closer to 2 or 3 months given the supply that is now coming in and is projected to come in through the summer months. It was a really hard conversation that we had to have, both internally and public health. And again, this was a decision on advice from the federal advisory committee to the provincial governments, right? Local public health wasn't making decisions about this. We supported it though, for those reasons that I outlined, but it's a tough conversation. Those people that Alex is referring to who were caring for them, we want to protect them. And that's why they were the first to receive any of the vaccine doses, right? That's why they were the first to get the protection. But it was a challenging conversation to unpack that we weren't going to necessarily go for second doses in that population, that we were going to start to do first doses to others. And I think on the whole was that by protecting more people in the population, we'd actually still be protecting the people that were taking care of Alex, because there'd be less people in hospital because of it, and less people in the community for them to be exposed to as well. So I think the strategy will bear out to be the right one, and more evidence suggests that's the case, but still very challenging conversations to have for sure.
All right, well, thank you for that. Unless I see any other questions pour in, I'm going to leave it at that by thanking both yourself for leading indomitably this public health for yourself and Dr. Mackey. I know you have a challenging time at times on social media. I follow it. I try to stay out of it. But, I appreciate that, you've had a difficult job, and the messaging's been tough, and for what it's worth, I feel your pain. I'm just glad I'm not sitting in your shoes. That's all I'm saying.
Well, thanks for your support. That's really
So thanks for all the great work you're doing. Alex Kopacz, thank you for sharing such a powerful story and personal story of your experiences with COVID-19. I think it speaks directly to Londoners, and it speaks to the importance of public health measures to curtail the spread of the virus, and B, the importance of getting vaccinated cannot be understated. It's a critical component of helping us keep this pandemic under control. And if we can prevent, and I'm sure you share the sentiment, even one more person from contracting the disease, we've done our job. So thank you both. Thank you to our excellent exec assistant, Mr. Michael Masonville, who's been sitting in a corner of your Zoom screen all evening long, ready to jump in at a moment's notice at any technical issues that arise. Thank you to Rogers TV London for being patient with me as I struggled through my technology. And thank you all to all of our viewers here in London who are diligently following public health protocols, socially distancing, and most importantly, when your turn comes to get your shot, go get it. Don't wait. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm going to wish you all farewell. Thank you all.